could mean for his future, as well as what that could mean for his future as well. To my surprise and shock, he actually answered back the emails remarkably fast, with responses to everything I said. Posted above are the responses to the 2 emails I sent to him, the second being a response to my response to his. So in other words, those emails I just read are the original email and the response back to Ian from Ian's response to him, to theirs. Now, continuing on, this is continuing on Game Boy's description and thoughts on this. And I quote, In it, Flynn even said to try and make this stuff public, or just keeping it hidden in emails. In it, Flynn even said to try and make this stuff public instead of just keeping it hidden in emails. So here we go. Basically saying Flynn, I guess, suggested let everybody know. Not just do Bumble King, but let everybody else know. However, BumbleKing.com is a hotspot for his supporters. So instead of being bombarded by people that only support him and nobody else, I figure I'd post them here instead. So in other words, Game Boy Sage is realizing that BumbleKing.com, as much as you can, as much as a free message board as that should be, is realizing that no matter what they'll say there, that they're going to get bombarded. They're going to get hit with negative responses from supporters of Ian Flynn. Now, continuing on, and I quote more of Game Boy Sage's thoughts here, their responses, the thing in the description box. And I quote, my first thought, basically the question is, my first thoughts? Yeah, Flynn is a very nice guy. I can see why anybody would like him who meets him in person. He not only answered back to me quickly, but he treated me with full respect and didn't just brush me off as a random Sonic fan that I am. That impressed me, and I have to give him a few marks as a human being for it. And I could see the Sonic fanboyism, in him. It certainly is hard to demoralize someone after actually talking to them and not simply going by what's in your head. However, does being a very nice person mean I have to like everything he does and publishes? Nope. So let's move on to the actual stuff about the comic, shall we? Continuing on, Game Boy Sage's thoughts, and I quote, The first point to mention is Other M. At first, I was concerned by the fact he wanted to make no connection to them at all, and tried to say they were totally different. But with the second email, he was able to at least admit that yes, in a few ways, they are similar in a few ways, if not by mere coincidence, if nothing else. Continuing on. Now, things going poorly for our heroes, that I can handle. Sure, that's what is going on. But then you toss in the fact that Hershey might be dead, but probably not, based on 233, and the fact that something horrible is probably going to happen in 234, not proven yet, but greatly implied, and that statement starts to lose a little credibility. Once you kill off someone for any reason, it stops being going poorly, and more the Other M route. If he doesn't start killing people off, though, then yeah, going poorly I can handle. Okay, so what Game Boy Sage is saying here on the first page, because basically what I did was I copied and pasted their description in the description box, their thoughts, if you will, onto WordPad, and it came out with 4 pages. So, whew, Game Boy Sage, give you credit there. But basically what they're saying there, like on the first page is, look, they can handle things going poorly like I can, because I'm, like I've mentioned before, I'll only at times, on rare occasions throughout this whole thing now, catch glimpses and pieces of the main story, and maybe on rare occasions read the side story, courtesy of YouTube. But that's about it. But what they're saying is that, just like anybody else, they can handle things going poorly, but if something really bad happens next month, that's one thing they can't handle. So basically, Game Boy Sage is saying, hey, look, if he basically contracts what he's saying, or contracts what he's saying, or contracts what he's saying, basically, then that's going to be it. That's going to be like I'm not going to read this thing for a while anymore till something good happens. All right, now here's page 2, continuing on to Game Boy Sage's thoughts. And I apologize if this is in multiple parts. I mean, this is a long sucker. But again, this is Game Boy Sage's thoughts, page 2, and continuing on, and I quote, I was also a little concerned by the usage of cleaning house to describe the 8 characters Flynn killed off during the early years of his writing for the comic. Sure, a lot of them were obscure characters or one-shots that only appeared once or twice. But Locke, Knuckles' father, I think he deserved a little bit more than a mere house cleaning by a new writer, especially with how things were left off when he died. This also makes me worried that he might decide to do another cleaning house later on with other characters he doesn't deem worthy of living any longer. Hershey, maybe? Probably not based on 233. Nicole? This one is getting dangerously close to being possible in 234, but nothing proven yet. In short, my fears were more for the deaths he was planning to do up to 250, and not so much the ones he's already done, even though Locke was a big one. So, Game Boy Sage is saying right there that the main concern is the cleaning house terminology. It's like, let's say WWE or even TNA wrestling. Every spring after WrestleMania, WWE does what they call the annual spring cleaning or summer cleaning. Basically, they look at those on the main roster, whether it's wrestlers, divas, announcers, whatever, and even those in the developmental territory, FCW, and they either decide whether they still have potential to continue on, that there's still something left to salvage, or they just decide, you know what, we're just going to cut ties with these people, let them go back to the independents, maybe go somewhere else, improve their skills, and perhaps someday bring them back. Who knows? Well, in the case of comic book death, that does happen, but I guess in the case of Sonic, it doesn't really. But that's basically what Game Boy Sage is concerned about, is the cleaning house kind of deal. Okay, now continuing on, Game Boy Sage's thoughts, and I quote again. As for Bunny, I still find his reasoning a tad weak, since it all boils down to a wizard did it. TT, if his plan is to show her dealing with losing her power, it can't be done in a much more believable. Can't it be done in a much more believable way? Basically asking the question, couldn't he have done this more believably, more like, okay, realistically? Heck, even having her turn back to normal due to the time reversal in 230 would have been more believable than how he did it, regardless of the magic and emeralds Axis has in his possession. Okay, so Game Boy Sage is basically saying that it's more believable if, let's say, Bunny got, de-roboticized in, 225, or let's say if she was involved in Genesis and she was de-roboticized and all that, it'd be more believable if Sonic went back in time and made sure she was never roboticized, that he could understand. Oh, that they can understand. All right. That's what I'm reading into. That's what I'm kind of getting my reading into with these thoughts. Now, continuing on, and I quote, as for 175 to 177, it might be guessing more than anything, but I think the problem was more that it only took like 4 of them to bust into Robotnik's lair and to free everyone from the grape apes. If, say, a comic or two were spent in having Sonic and the remaining freedom fighters travel to find friends and allies to help them in their time of need, that could have been pretty epic. That could have been pretty epic and made Sonic try using diplomacy and stuff to get what he needed. Then, with an army behind him, they could have busted down the defenses and saved the day in a more believable way. This I can understand. This I agree with. And I'm sure anybody else would agree with. But I think Game Boy Sage, if you're listening, and I think anybody else listening to this would agree, the only reason he did this, with the exception of Nicole, is because I mentioned this before, is the fact that because of the contract with Sega, he has to sometimes focus an anniversary issue or the climax of one of his big story arcs with the game characters being the main heroes, to kind of still indicate that even though this comic is based on all continuities, that the game characters are the main focus sometimes when it comes to the games. Basically, that was also just a nod to the game fans saying, look, to Sega and the game fans saying, look, the game characters save the day. Or save the friends, just like they do in the games. That's what I saw. Now, continuing on with Game Boy Sage's response, and I quote, in a sense, it goes back to what I keep saying about Flynn not having a good payoff to his stories. It started with Robotnik destroying the kingdom, zapping everyone but 4 or so people into captivity, and leaving Sonic broken on the ground by a mocking Robotnik. Pretty epic, right? Well, how does it end? The 4 of them alone bust in and saved the day. Continuing on, did we need someone to die in there to make it more epic or interesting? Nope. More build-up mixed with a bit more believability or of a rescue could have been done plenty and made it all more satisfying. Again, understandable, but very understandable. But again, the thing is, folks, in Game Boy Sage, you have to realize it's all about the agreement with Sega. Basically, one of the things is, I think the agreement is every now and then an anniversary issue, or at least a major climax or semi-climax point to an epic story or arc, has to focus on the game characters being the heroes. You see what I'm saying? All right. Continuing on with page 3. We're almost done here, folks. This is a long one. We're almost there. But continuing on, going on to page 3. I'm not, and this is, again, quoting Game Boy Sage, I'm not too sure about the team dynamics or the mold either, in his point of view. For me, the team dynamic has been one of the best parts of the entire series. All the characters play well off each other and are good supports for each other. Take that away and I find it hard to believe it'll be just as fun to watch. And I'm not too sure how you could fix the mold either, while not ruining the comic. Pick any comic you want, and that is the mold. The X-Men win, always, eventually. The TMNT win, always, eventually, etc., etc. So Game Boy Sage is basically bringing out a good point too. Ian Flynn says, okay, I want to basically change things up. I want to, kind of take away, I want to change things up of, the good guys always win, etc., etc. What Game Boy Sage is saying there is, look, you can't always, basically Game Boy Sage is pointing out there, look, you can't always try that because it never works. It's always going to lead back to the good guys, the main team, getting together, winning the day. That's how things are. It's like with Rescue Rangers, Chippendale Rescue Rangers. You always know with each episode they're going to face a criminal, and just when things look bleak, they're going to come back and they're going to win. It's kind of like, again, making a wrestling reference,